they still have the shapes of your typical cat toes and pads, but they are proportionally a little bit smaller. The heel pad is to the toes. And so just something to think about. You know, if you look at the size of these toes, they're almost as large as that big male bobcat. Not quite, obviously, but the pad is significantly smaller. So just something to keep in mind.
Is there anything different with the negative spaces and fronts and rears cats, especially housecats versus bobcats?
There is, but it can be subtle.
Right.
But housecats tend to be more bunched together. The other thing is that we'll talk about next is male versus female, which I was going to ask, but figured we'd just stick with what we're here. You can't tell. Cats are one of those things in the world, wild cats, at least a lot of the big cats in Africa are mountain lions and bobcats, jaguars. One of the species, very sexually dimorphic, that you can actually tell males from females. Tons of species you can't do that. Not of cats necessarily, but obviously in the world. But house cats don't fall into that category. They're just too tough to. They've changed so much, I guess, that it's harder to tell. And some of that has to do with their shapes, and so they just tend to be a little bit more bunched together. Their tracks, less negative space on the whole, and not those considerable differences that you get in like a male versus a female in a mountain lion or a bobcat. And so the other thing too is that felis species, their heel pad tends to be directly in line with the toes themselves, meaning if the toes are going that direction, the heel pad is pointing that direction. Whereas bobcats and stuff actually have toes are pointing this way and the heel pad is cocked slightly out to the outside. Using that, there are so many better things to use for diagnostic stuff than that, but it's just something to think about. So that would also lend to some differences in negative space, potentially, but whether or not it matters is another question. So, male versus female. We could probably look in Dave's book later on. I think that's where...
Yeah, he's got a good drawing.
Yeah, and those are the track plates from something I did at Pacific Northwest way back when. But if you look at this, in this track, front foot here, would you say that this track is slimmer, daintier, more teardrop shaped toes, or sort of squatter, chunkier together and rounder toes? Well, I'll just start there. And I know you don't necessarily have a comparison, but just descriptive wise, rounder, right? Yep. Okay, cool. So on the whole, this track is wide. It is pretty squat. I'm not exactly sure which is a good place to be with some of these types of things. But when I look at this, I am seeing wider heel pad, so just a kind of beefier, thicker heel pad at the front, rounder toes, more robust toes. They don't have that narrowness to them. In the hind foot, even though we've got length, because that just happens, we still have good, round, beefy toes. In the hind foot of females, they tend to be considerably more teardrop shaped, so longer. More shaped like this. This is actually a male, but all the toes are more shaped like this all the way across the foot. So I think this is a male. Also the size, especially considering that you all, this to me looks like a medium-sized male. But it could also just be a big female, and this is how she was registering the world. But those are things to look for.
You said the female, the hind toes are more teardrop? Is I get that right, or the opposite way?
Correct. And all the toes are more teardrop shaped in females.
Okay, all toes.
The other thing in females is because they are longer, they are less squat, they tend to have more negative space between the toes and the heel pad, especially prominently on the hind foot. Okay? And we'll look at that if we think of it when we get back. But it can be done with pretty reliable accuracy in the field. So, kind of cool.
So you don't go by by size. So the reason I'm asking, I used to go to mountain lion kill sites, and when I was
Oh,
trained,
really? Who'd
they
you do
told
that with?
me it was with Furman University, but it